Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining in today and joining for this discussion. So, this is our second day of the demystifying e-commerce in the post-COVID-19 world. Yesterday, we had an amazing discussion about best practices around omni-channel solution, and today we are here gathered together to demystify another buzzword of these times, which is direct to consumer. I think almost every brand that we speak to wants to become D2C, and rightly so, because there is a big wave going on even globally about D2C transition, and their sales have seen a significant spike, and they're expected to double in the next couple of years. And we are seeing a similar trend in India as well. In fact, we recently released a report in which we had seen that there is a 65% increase in brands who have built their own website, and there is a 3x increase in volumes from website compared to marketplaces. Having said that, the brands are not going away from marketplaces. I think the strategy that they're following is that they would want to do a mix of both marketplaces and website. And I think this phenomenal growth of D2C platforms, and we have three great successful D2C businesses there. I think this is, leading a lot of brands to rethink their online sales strategy, and factors like control on consumer experience, full visibility of customer data, and the ability to leverage brand loyalty with direct access to consumers is, I think, making brands realize that this is the way forward. And in fact, this is going on beyond websites. We are seeing many few apparel players even adopting concepts like store on wheels and taking the stores literally to the consumer so that they can shop in there while being in their apartment complexes. So I think there are very interesting models that are emerging. But what we also realize when talking to these brands is, while it's a big buzzword, but companies are still trying to figure out what are the answers to manage, like trying to figure out answers for how do they manage their website, how do they become direct to consumer, how do they leverage this gold mine called consumer data. Everyone keeps talking about it. So with that thought, we thought, since we stand for simplifying e-commerce selling, we thought of hosting a session so that we can help try and help you understand the nitty-gritties of D2C with these industry stalwarts. So I obviously have these business leaders from some of the most successful D2C companies that have established their brand loyalty amongst consumers. And all three of them have been associated with e-commerce since a very long time and have played a really crucial role in evolving our product offerings over time. So thus, these were the first names that actually came to my mind when we were thinking about doing this webinar, and they were kind enough to volunteer and be a part of this panel. So thanks for that. So let's start our discussion. Before we do that, about a discussion about decoding the direct-to-consumer best practices with these young and talented industry leaders. Let me first start with introducing these. So we have with us Kaushik, Shivani, and Tarun. Would be great if you can introduce yourself. Kaushik, we could probably go with you first.
Sure, thanks, Kapil, for the kind words. Yes, we've been on Uniware and Unicommerce for a long while. It has helped us scale and learn more about our own business. I think just by means of introduction, I'm the co-founder and COO of Sugar Cosmetics. We're a color cosmetics player that started digitally. We started online for the first 2 years, 2015 to 2017. We only sold online, and eventually, although we did diversify into offline, uh, there's this term we use very frequently. Digitally native is something which we have been and which we will always be. Which is why when a couple you proposed the idea of this topic of demystifying D2C, the first thought that struck me was, wow, I have so many mistakes to share so that others don't make those same mistakes. So happy to share my experience along with two very dear friends of mine. So we'll pass this on to maybe Shivani next, and then we can continue.
Shivani, we can't hear
Shivani,
you.
you're on
You're on
mute.
mute.
Sorry. Thanks, Kaushik. Thanks, Kapil. Hi, everyone. I'm Shivani Podar. I'm the co-founder of High Street Essentials. We have two fashion brands. One is called Fab Alley, which is the brand that we started with in 2012. So it's been about 2 years now. Fab Alley is a Western wear brand, and our second brand is called India, which is an ethnic wear brand. Between the two brands, we cover the entire women's apparel and some part of accessories. So that's the space that we're in. We were like Kaushik, we were online only for slightly longer. So we were only online only for about 4 to 5 years of our journey. So from 2012 till about 2016 end, we were only selling through our website first, and then through some marketplaces. Started the offline journey in early 2017. Today, the business is a very healthy combination of both online and offline. And of course, D2C, given that's the buzzword, especially post-COVID, I think that's something that we've always focused on. Our business has always, ensured that's kind of top priority. And as again, Kaushik said, we strongly believe that we're online first, irrespective of where, irrespective of whether, we sell today, we do sell offline also, but just in terms of how we think, the processes, technology behind it, how fashion moves, etc. The thought is online first, which is, digitally native essentially. So yeah, so thank you. Happy to be here.
Okay, thanks, Shivani. Tarun, if you could.
Hi, this is Tarun. Tarun Sharma. I'm the co-founder and CEO of M Caffeine. M Caffeine is India's first caffeinated personal care brand. In a nutshell, we use caffeine, which is one of the most widest and globally accepted potent ingredient for skincare and hair care. So we use that ingredient, caffeine, to build all your products of skincare and hair care. So we are the first ones to do it in India, and now it has been fairly adopted in the Indian market. Globally, it is a phenomenon. It has been a phenomenon. We are a 4-year-old brand. We are an online-only brand. We don't have any offline presence like Kaushik and Shivani has. So we have always been an internet-first brand. As Kaushik mentioned, that we are a digitally native vertical brand, wherein if it all at some point of time will go offline, the roots will be digital. So far, we sell from our own platform, largely the marketplaces like Amazon, Nykaa, Flipkart, etc. And we are trying to build an aspirational beauty brand for the young millennials of India. And the goal is to kind of take one of those aspirational brands from India and put India on that global map of aspirational brands. And I think that's what we are trying to do, but a long way to go. And happy to be here. At no point of time I am an expert. We can share what we have learned as mistakes, which are thousands of them, and probably things which have worked for us. So really happy to be here.
Oh, great. Thank you. Thanks, everyone. I think you're being very humble in terms of defining a scale. So I think the poll that we ran just before all of us joined, we were trying to profile the kind of attendees. I think many of them are just either thinking about D2C or have just begun their D2C journey. I think it will be helpful if each of you can describe what in your mind is like what is direct to consumer for you. And what is one thing that has worked for your organization, one key success mantra that has worked for you, which has helped you scale your business? Before we start our discussion on this, I think that will be helpful for the audience. So Kaushik, maybe we can start with you.
Yeah, okay, maybe I'll take that. So D2C, very simply put, is direct to consumer, right? So let's step back a bit. When we historically sell something, we typically align with a trade partner, which means if you're selling offline, you will try to get into a retail chain or a bunch of shops to retail it through. It is very tough to do that, because imagine this: with a new brand, if you go to any seller, they're going to ask you that, I'm going to give you shelf space. Why? Is there demand? Are people going to buy? Because shelf space is gold. I can't keep a product if they're not going to move. How do you prove demand? So that is where initially you have to try and prove demand on your own. Yes, brands like partner channels, like take it, horizontal players, Amazon, Myntra, and many others, they've really made it easy to reach the consumer. But there's always be a lot of competition you will face with other brands. So direct to consumer in its bare basic stripped down senses, wherein you directly sell to the customer online through your own website or app. And one thing which has helped us is engage with customers. So it's a funnel, right? It's a funnel at the end of the day. Sale happens at the lower end of the funnel. Right at the top, it's awareness, interest, decision. So that's how it flows. Awareness happens in platforms where people aren't necessarily there to buy, just to learn, engage. So say maybe Instagram has worked very well for us. We push out a lot of content, and I think that builds trust, and trust obviously has to come before purchase. So that's something which has helped us.
Sure. Shivani, for you, if you can help define, if add on to what Kaushik is saying about D2C and anything that has worked for your brand.
Yeah, so I think from a D2C point of view, essentially, I mean, D2C, I think it's a mindset where we're saying that, can we know our customers well? So even if a small part of your business for everybody who's attending today comes, directly through, your direct channels where you're directly selling to your customer, which in our case is our website. You understand who is your customer, who is buying, what is the demographic, why are they buying something, what does the funnel look like, what does the journey look like. So just that data itself, gives us a lot of input on what to do with respect to the business. And it has 2 or 3 parts, right? It can start with the product itself, that what are your customers buying and why are they buying it. You have their data, right? You can make calls, your customer service team, your design team, even us as founders, we talk to our customers, right? So we make calls, we understand what is working, what's not working. So just be able to kind of directly own your customer in a way where they also when when you're selling from a DTC point of D2C point of view, there's a lot of content that like Kaushik said, that you can kind of put through, which will be very difficult whether when you sell through a third party or even offline. So you can put through that content where people come and so it's very it's relatively easier to establish a brand quickly, because customers can go and they can see what you stand for. And if communication is clear, it takes years and years, or maybe 15-20 years typically in the offline space to become a large brand, right? A known large brand. But online brands are able to shorten this life cycle to 5, 7, 8 years. And I think that's what the whole D2C mechanism really does. For us, I think, like I said, just really owning customer data and utilizing it very well in our design is what really helped us scale. So, whether, from a fashion point of view, whether a garment is, what's the cut, what's the color, what's the sleeve, what's the neck, why are customers buying what they are buying, what's the look, how does it look on the model. There's so many attributes that you can kind of point out, and based on that we've customized our product over time. So what started within 2012 versus where we are today for both our brands, it's very different. And I think that's the journey that really, when you know your customer, that's the journey that you can kind of undertake, and hence kind of build on it. So that's something that just owning a lot of data, understanding it, and being very analytical about it is what's helped us scale.
Sure. Thanks, Shivani. Tarun, would be great to hear from you, especially this has been a global trend, as you rightly said, but you were kind of the pioneers of doing that in India. So how has the D2C journey been for you, and what has really worked for you, given that this was a very novel concept?
Right, and this is a classical Viva problem, no? दो लोगों ने बहुत सारा जवाब दे दिया होता है. You're trying to figure out अब इसके ऊपर क्या बोलना. But I'll try to justify whatever we have learned from the D2C angle of it. I think there are 2 parts to any business, right? Volumes and voice. We are not a D2C brand with respect to volumes. Our volumes comes from marketplaces like Amazon, Nike.
That's true.
But with respect to voice, we are truly a D2C brand. And a lot of people are, even if a 100% offline brand, it can also be a 100% D2C brand with respect to the voice building part of it.
Right.
Wherein Instagrams and YouTubes and earlier TikToks and Quoras and Twitters of the world kind of help you penetrate the narrative to the right audience, as Kaushik said, on their unfiltered attention zone in their mobile screens. So D2C for us is largely getting direct to the customers, be it the volume or be it the voice. Wherein volumes, our own channel plays a very important part to it, and the rest of the things can be taken care by the social media handles. At the end of the day, what it brings is a gold mine of data. And data is not just the consumer purchase data, right? It is also an instance. Data is an instance for us. So if you have engaged with a certain post of ours or commented on a certain video of ours, that is also an instant, because that proves my ability to create a certain engaging content or my inability to create a certain engaging content. So I think it all boils down to that data part of it. Whosoever would be able to kind of crunch that data and make data speak about the right language and the right problem answers to the problems we are facing with respect to volumes or voice would be able to leverage this D2C channel of their be voice. So for us, it is largely towards data. How can we build data from the D2C volume funnel or D2C voice funnel?
Right. Great. Thanks, Arun, and thanks everyone. Now I have certain questions for you, and in fact, given the profile of the attendees from the initial poll, at least, majority of them were trying to figure out what D2C is, or maybe just started the journey. Next big bucket was brands selling on both marketplaces and websites. So Tarun, I have a related question to you on that. That how important is it to have marketplaces as partners in the growth journey of a D2C brand? Should a brand consider them as a distributor channel if you were to draw an analogy from an offline world that Kaushik was pointing to in the beginning? And if that is the case, should a brand first consider launching website first, or do marketplace first, like build a brand of theirs on their website and then go to marketplaces as a distribution channel? And how did you make that decision for MCaffeine if you had ever had to do that?
Got it. I think answering in reverse order, we did it simultaneously. We launched on all our channel partners, which are Amazons and Nykaas of the world, and obviously our own website. Sure. I think the objective should be clearly defined from a certain partner, any partner for that. Right now, the retailer partners or the sales partners. Our objective for building our own store was with a clear agenda that nobody can tell the MCaffeine story better than how we can tell it on our platform. Right. Be it the product imagery, be it the narrative, or be it why we are doing it. So our own platform acts as a brand association tool, brand building tool, product exploration tool, etc. So that was the objective, and we continue to build that channel with a single objective of that. On the marketplaces, we were very clear that this is where the volumes are. This is where the relevant audience would come. Be it they're coming from our Instagram channels or our website, or natively we are capturing on Amazon and Nykaas of the world. Right. So we need to build volumes from these channels and build the right brand narrative for us in the outside world from our channel. So we launched it simultaneously, and from day one, it has been the same for us, and it will continue to be the same. But at some point of time, we realized that our brand store has also become a large part of our revenue channel, and hence it grew as a sales channel. But initially, the idea was very clear that we need to tell our story in the most perfect way possible, and only our store can do it. But at the same time, we cannot negate the volumes which will come from the marketplaces, because that kind of serves a lot of purpose on supply end, getting the efficiency right, getting the margins right, etc., etc. So both are important. I don't think that there has to be first or second. If the objective is clearly defined, you can do it simultaneously.
And for you, did these go hand in hand in terms of your messaging on the marketplaces also very consistent with the website, or that was just a pure sales channel, product is available, price is there?
I think our entire narrative building happens centrally. So it flows down to our website, it flows down to the other channels. But then on the marketplaces, you definitely has a certain limitation of how much and what can you tell. Right. So that kind of becomes contextualized on those platforms. But at the end of the day, it is central, because at the end of the day, if somebody is interacting with us on Amazon, some part of brand is getting built. So that is central, and that flows to both the streams.
So your recommendation, they should not ignore, even when they're starting out, they should not ignore this as a retail channel. They should treat this as a sales channel purely and prepare for that accordingly.
Yes. One of the caution point which we kind of learned the hard way was we did all the channels, then we rolled back, and then we built playbooks of different types of models of commerce. Sure. Amazon is one kind, which is marketplace. Nykaa is other kind. So you can optimize based on your requirement, but yes, both should go in hand.
So that's a very valuable suggestion. A related question, Shivani, to you, and I think it's coming from the audience as well, is that while many D2C brands, including yourself and even others also mentioned, they started as online focused, but many eventually have to adopt to the offline route, maybe through a distributor or through own outlets to get the necessary scale. So do you think when a D2C brand is launching up, they should build a strategy of going offline from day one?
Yeah, so no, I mean to directly answer. So no, I don't think there should be a strategy to go offline. I think the strategy needs to be, let's service our consumers wherever they shop from. So for us, for example, the thought was that initially in the first few years we wanted to establish our brand. We wanted to have enough consumers, enough proof of concept. We wanted to understand the price points, the product, etc. And then we said that once we've understood that, we have a large customer base. They are shopping offline as well. They are going to stores, both own stores, large formats, say such as a Lifestyle, etc. So customers are across. So for us, why should we restrict our channel? Because online, website, marketplace, they're all channels of distribution at the end of the day, right? Like you're a brand and you're servicing the consumer, and these are the only two constants, and the rest are you can sell from multi-channels at different points of time. So I think that's how we thought, and I would tell everybody that initial years I think just need to be spent on building your product, building your brand.
Sure.
Once there is enough comfort around that, once you know that you have enough, your target audience is there, you have enough people buying you, enough people loving your brand, that's when you need to really think that do I need offline for scale? A lot of categories may never need offline for scale, right? Like Tarun, they're doing fantastic business and they're online only.
Right.
I think it depends. So it's not a must. For us, because we're in the apparel business, there is a touch and feel factor. People do like to try, some part of it is there, which is why we said that it's important for us to build an omni-channel business which can kind of scale both online and offline, which is why we started that journey. But it's not a must to do. It's something that I think every entrepreneur needs to figure out at different parts of their own journey.
Sure. And there's another follow-up question on that, Shivani, that somebody from the audience has asked, is that how do you differentiate your offerings in these channels? Do you have different products for online, different for offline? And do you keep one product line, like different product lines, different pricing, or do you, again, being a consistent omni-channel player across all the channels?
Yeah, so I think being consistent is hygiene. There is no way that you can have differential pricing, or even products for that matter, online or offline.
Yeah.
I think what we do is that we have, because online, there are no space constraints, so you can have a larger, larger portfolio. So we have many more styles online, and offline is a subset of what we have online. So if we, if in a season we'll do about 1,000 products, say for a brand online, offline, you'll typically send about 400. So that's how one looks at it. For the 400 that are sent offline, online and offline prices are 100% the same. There is no difference in terms of pricing for those products. And for the balance 600, which are online only, you can do more aggressive pricing, whether it's in the form of discounts or lower MRPs, etc. So that's how we look at it. But just having a consistent product offering across channels is a must.
Sure. Thanks. Thanks, Shivani. This is useful. So, Kaushik, for you, my question is, I think all of you have talked about that for a D2C brand to resonate with consumers, it needs to have a strong personality and association. Even Tarun also talked about the website driving that messaging. So how do you brainstorm about brand or product attributes at Sugar, and what role has it played for you specifically in your growth?
I think this is a level one question about how do you make a brand stand out, because while digital is great, the bane of digital is that while you are probably reading an article, there'll be a somebody just posted or tweeted notification and WhatsApp, and you get distracted. So I think very early in our journey, we decided that we're going to follow a credo internally. We're going to say we're going to design for digital. Now, what does design for digital mean? We looked at a lot of our products in our category, our competitor, and we realized that while the mode of purchase had evolved to maybe from just offline retail to online, the packaging of the products hadn't really changed. Today, if I put 4-5 products side by side, not many, you may not be able to tell which is which brand if you look from it in your, the palm of your hand on your screen. So that's when we realized that the design has to have a personality of its own. It has to be clutter breaking, because that gets talked about and shared, for better or for worse. Some might resonate with it, some might like it, but at least there is some engagement on it. So just to share an anecdote, when we had launched our lipsticks, and my product team is not very happy with me for this, but we decided that we're going to make square lipsticks, and the team thought I was crazy. I said, no, lipsticks, we're always used to seeing cylinders. Imagine black, we used to call BMS, black matte square. Imagine black matte square lipstick. They're going to look so good. Obviously, it pushed up the price of our containers, and the team wasn't happy. But I remember when our channel partners or we started promoting it, there was this curiosity, what is this, right? Mm-hmm. And till today, apart from crayons, because crayons, the form factor is cylindrical, all our lipsticks are actually square. All our lipsticks are black and matte. So today, of course, there are a lot of brands that do amazing work. But I think that is one thing which we decided very early, that we need to build a personality on the brand. I'll give an example. A lot of products are sold loose without an external carton, which we call the mono carton in our industry. And we said it doesn't matter if it's a 200 rupee nail paint or a 799 rupee lipstick. We have to give it the same treatment, because it's not about the product. They represent the brand. So every product of ours had a mono carton with a separate visual identity, and that is rare. Nail paints, for example, don't have mono cartons in the industry. So some of these things, although didn't help the bottom line in the short term, we just were fortunate enough to be able to stick to our guns and say that we will build this, and that has helped. I think for anybody listening to this and wanting to build D2C, it can't be only sales and not brand building. And brand building starts with everything what Tarun said, everything what Shivani said, that same pricing, great imagery. I mean, it's the personality, right? And you can't, if you come across as cheap, then that's the personality of the brand, and there is no recovering from that, right? So that's something we're very particular about.
Great. Thanks, Kaushik. I think people, we've already started getting comments that your thinking behind the product doesn't actually work for you, and there are avid consumers of your products.
Thank you very much.
Great. So Tarun, my next question is to you. That recently there have been many new product launches in the D2C space, and this question we had been getting even in our earlier webinars. That, like I mentioned, there have been many product launches in the D2C space, particularly in the personal care space, and many of them have bagged a lot of funding. But those who have not been able to secure funding and are running bootstrap operations, is there really a path for them to build a scalable brand focused on unit economics and profitability? And how do their priorities differ from, let's say, a funded startup?
Got it. I think first thoughts, whether funded, not funded, priority should be unit economics and profitability. I mean, apart from brand building, I mean, you cannot have an alternate to unit economics, right? That has to be right, whether you have 100 crores, 200 crores, or probably 2 crores in the bank account.
Right.
That's because that's the unit we're selling to, and that's the economics we're talking about, that unit. Now, I think, yes, personal care space has seen a lot of action with respect to investor interest. But if you see the largest challenger digital native brand, which is Wow Cosmetics, is bootstrapped, right? If you look at other sectors like electronics, for that matter, both not funded. I mean, they have obviously raised a couple of rounds of venture debt, but in all literal terms, they are bootstrapped, right? And they're one of the largest online only brand or online brand which you can see about, right?
Yep.
So funding is not at all necessary. Fundamentally, funding accelerates the activities which you want to do. And activity can be setting up your own manufacturing unit, geographical expansion, and the sky's the limit. But fundamentally, I think profitability should be the priority, whether funded or not. If somebody wants to build it bootstrapped, you should definitely build it bootstrapped. But if you are going through the route of taking external funding, treat investors as a partner. If you choose the right partner for the brand, you will eventually take the right calls. I mean, if you choose someone who wants to do what you want to do in 7 years with respect to brand building and sales, somebody has a very different opinion to it. You can debate it out. If the paths are different, you will end up becoming a Casper of India. That's what my blunt opinion is. And we have raised around $2 million, right? And around 73% of the money is still in the bank. So you just don't require money. At the end of the day, the unit needs to kind of pull back to you. पिछले महीने का sales से इस महीने का marketing निकलना चाहिए. That's how the business runs. And at the end of the day, you build a brand alongside. So bootstrap, all for it. Raise capital from the right people. You will eventually land up at the right position.
I can see Kaushik and Shivani going all smiles. I think they can completely relate to this topic.
We can. I was about to ask, give us some of the money. I mean, he has all that money in the bank account in these times. Fabulous job, Tarun. Fabulous job.
Thank you.
Great. Kaushik, my next question is to you, and this has come from the audience as well, that in terms of organization design, how should a successful D2C brand plan its organization structure? How have you designed your organization structure at Sugar, which has helped you scale the businesses? And this is also relevant for someone who's right now largely offline and wants to transition to becoming a D2C brand now.
Got it. So, Kapil, I think I mentioned a bit of this when we had spoken earlier, that for those who have been selling mostly via traditional channels, when they look at offline, historically it never mattered as much because it seemed to be a very small part of the business. Now the last 3, 4, 5 months have changed that. When that is it's like a lot of retail is stuck at a red light signal and online is getting a freeway to ride, right? So you want in on that. My only petition to anybody who's getting into that is that let's not look at it as just a sales channel and say, let's just put someone to push our products. Because see, if we mindlessly push products, then as a new brand, unless you have some demand, not every partner is going to give you a outright purchase agreement. They're going to tell you that, okay, sale or return karte hai, which means they will take the product, and if it doesn't sell, and this has happened to us, mistakes, right? We have learned that there was one partner wherein we pushed product and we said, wow, great, job done. And because this is long back, of course, 2016, 2017, because we didn't sit with the partner and say, okay, now how do we sell it, right? I mean, as Tarun said that, my property is wherein I build voice, I build my narrative. But how do you ensure that that narrative also flows to every point of sale, whether online or offline? I think that is important. For that, you need to build a team, right? Which means if you look at a partner channel, like say an Amazon or Flipkart, right? Whoever is leading that person shouldn't just have sales target or say targets to raise a purchase order, right? Offtake needs to be a target. There are people buying. And okay, there are different levels. One is to say billing karo, right? This is the traditional thinking. Don't stop at that because it's going to come back. Go level 2. Chalo, sell karo. Don't stop at that, because then if you don't control discounting, aapka brand, as Shivani said, there will be no price parity everywhere. Now, then you go to level 3 and said billing karo, offtake karo. Don't give discounting over beyond the approved guardrail which you set for the brand. Then you are fencing your team and saying that now play with it. And I've seen that actually helps your team members get creative, and then they start thinking in the right direction. That okay, what kind of campaigns can we run? The word internally, I've it's an internal peeve of mine. Whenever we discuss marketing calendars, I have banned the word offers. I've said bhale aap offer chalo, but call it campaign, because it starts with the way you think. You run an offer, I don't mind, but call it campaign. Don't call it an offer, because tomorrow you're going to come and tell me that ek aur offer chilate. And that there is no end to it, right? Why do you want to compete on price? I mean, M-Caffeine, Fabally said people don't buy it because of the price. People buy it because they love the brand and the products, right? So that's one thing. And my sense is that if you get somebody who's had a work experience of just pushing either POs or just selling, they might find it difficult to wrap their head around this way of selling while protecting the brand, right? So that is one thing. And so this is about partner channels. I just want to spend a minute on the direct to customer channels also. So in there, again, the sales part remains the same, but your brand is built by serving the customer, to quote what Shivani said, right? So which means what? Which means recruiting somebody who creates great content around your product and brand, which can be pushed to maybe an Instagram or Twitter, wherever you are. Quora, I think Tarun mentioned, or you have a great operations team, which if not next day delivery, can at least do next to next day delivery. So the whole supply chain, and these may seem like, why should I invest so much upfront? It's actually not so much of an investment, right? Like today, it's actually become very simple to run your own platform, whether it be working with Shopify, Uniware. I mean, our entire tech stack. It is not a very heavy tech team, and tech is not the challenge. It's just about finding out how to leverage the tools that are very easily available,
right,
and put a person who's keen on learning and executing.
Sure. Thanks, Kaushik. Actually, I'm taking the question further to you, Shivani, that let's say you figured out the organization design, but there are other elements of the culture, like especially in the initial stages, going back to when you started the company. There's also a question from the audience that should they look at hiring a lot of people? How should they go about doing hiring and making sure that the culture and the brand values stay intact? How did you manage to do that, especially in the initial years of setting up the brand?
Yeah, so I'm a big believer of small teams, especially in the initial few years. I think being lean, for founders to kind of get their hands dirty and do all the work, and I'm sure all of us have done that. So I would strongly suggest that hire people who you need. Build smaller teams initially and get people who really believe in what you want to do. I mean, I think everyone said that so many times. It's become like, I mean, but yeah, people, those early people, and it's been 8 years for us, and there are, a few people who are still with us, after 8 years, from the first team of like 6 people. So I think, just hire people who, who believe in you, who ready to kind of get their hands dirty, do everything. Because in the initial, few years, I was doing customer service, I was doing dispatch, I was the founder, and, so you're pretty much doing everything. So I think definitely, for people listening in today, I mean, start with 5, 8, 10, depending on your company, what you're looking at doing, etc. Start with small teams, get the right set of people, give them some ESOPs, some stock options if you can, early, because that will motivate them. They'll they always they almost feel like they're co-founders of the company in many ways, and then build the team. And I think that's what I would suggest, in terms of the culture. Also, early on, just for the founders or even the top management to kind of, if there is, to set some things that how you want to run the company in terms of in terms of aggression, in terms of how you want to position your brand, in terms of service levels, in terms of so many things. So I think just setting those basic things upfront, and everything evolves. But setting some of these things in place, and I think a lot of it is about the founders themselves, right? Like about how they are and who they are, and a lot of that culture flows in the company. So I think those were the early years for us. And I mean, the first 3 years probably was what I learned in those 3 years. I've not learned in the next 5 years, and I don't think I'm going to probably cumulatively learn as much, because just the kind of work and the amount of work that you do at that time is amazing. And at the end of it, if you feel that today, even with the same 6-member team, you can still build your company and run your company, I mean, that should be a proud moment. And I think that's how I would look at building again if I were to build another company.
Sure. No, thanks. This is very useful. I think there are a lot of questions coming in. But before we do that, before we actually get to the audience, taking questions from the audience, it's time to actually unveil the brand story of a campaign that we launched called Share and Inspire. We wanted to also get in entries from a few other brands who have made a mark and wanted them to share their story. So I'll be inviting Archie to take it ahead. Over to you, Archie. Archie, you're on mute.
Thank you, Kapil. So first, I would like to thank all the three panelists, Shivani, Kaushik, and Tarun, for being such an amazing speakers and sharing such insightful and crucial aspects for D2C selling with the audience today. I'm sure these insights are going to help them in many ways, and so that they can scale up their business and achieve optimal growth in the future. Now about the campaign that we launched. So we launched Share and Inspire campaign to provide space to the sellers and e-commerce businesses to share and talk about their journey of how they actually became a successful D2C brand. And the responses we received were overwhelming. Out of many stories we heard, we have selected one that truly has an inspirational journey. And it is the story of Orna Mas, leading fashion label founded by Ojaswita, who is already there on the panelist now. I would like to invite Ojaswita to share her story with all of us. And after that, I think she has a question to ask all three of you, so that to mark the beginning of the Q&A session with the audience. So over to you, Ojaswita.
Hi everyone, I'm Ojaswita and I'm the creative head and founder of Orna Mas. So initially, I'd worked with the Swarovski and Gitanjali group, and I'm from NIFT, by the way, and post which I started my own label in 2013. So yeah, since then it's been quite a journey, and it's been worn by the A-listers of Bollywood such as Sonam Kapoor, Neha Dhupia, Dia Mirza, and it's been featured on magazines as well, such as Vogue, Vogue Italia, Cosmopolitan, and even on shows such as I'm Too Sexy for My Shoes, like featured on NDTV Prime and Kingfisher Calendar. So yeah, like initially when I started, I was more on the lines of, I want to showcase my design as a designer, and I would want the customers to somehow accept what I am designing for them. And I was less customer centric. I was more on the lines of, let me establish myself as a designer first. But gradually, I think I learned that there was this gap that no designer as such is fulfilling, which was of complete customization. So we started doing customization with a lot of women of different age groups. They WhatsApp us the outfit images, or they come to my studio and they come with their lehengas and all, and we match the entire jewelry set, and we match the entire, whether it's a hairband or a bodysuit, we match the entire thing for them. Color wise, shape wise, plating wise, whether they're allergic or they're non-allergic, and all of that. And and I feel if I particularly have to give my advice to people who want to enter this kind of a field, would be cementing relationships with the customers. So since I felt that this was a gap and a lot of good designers, big designers would avoid new customers to customize it for them just for the sake of color, or maybe just for changing the little plating. So me as a jewelry designer, I felt that I could fill that gap particularly. So yeah.
Awesome.
Thanks, Ojaswita. Actually, you mentioned that Ojaswita had a question for the panelists, so maybe we could start
Yes.
with that before we start the.
So I am currently retailing almost everywhere. I think so. I heard of Unicommerce through Nykaa actually. I'm retailing with Nykaa Fashions. I'm retailing with Bernia's pop-up shop. Then Aza online and offline. So yeah, LBB as well. Have my own website. Have done promotion, PR, and everything. Apart from all this, what do you feel that what am I missing out in terms of growth? Like, how can I scale this up completely? Like, apart from me supplying everywhere, and like what is like I feel that even though I'm supplying everywhere, sales is going good and all of that, but there is one saturation point that has come. So how do I break that thing, is my question.
And so, just in fact, that's a question. A lot of questions that we, similar questions that we get from the audience. So, would be helpful. Any one of you can take this up in terms of how do they drive growth, particularly in the initial phase. How do they acquire customers, and like even at a mid stage where Ojaswita is, how do you drive growth there? So, would be helpful. Maybe Shivani, Kaushik, if you could take this.
All right, I'll take it. Yeah. So, all right. So I think there are three, three key heads of looking at growth. When you start looking at it, it's product, brand, and distribution broadly. And so say for a jewelry brand, for any category, actually, let's look at it more generically. So from a product point of view, I mean, you can add more products. So I mean, it's either depth or width, right? So you add more products, which is, you add more categories. So if somebody is doing jewelry, you can add different kinds of jewelry in that. Or within a category, you can do more and more. So for example, within apparel, if we are doing dresses, if you've got 100 dresses, you can do 1,000, for example. Right? So one is on the product side. So I think for everybody listening in initially, I mean, you need to, figure out what's the right product mix for you. So for fashion, for example, it's 1,000 styles, right? Because less than that, fashion changes fast. So less than that, you can't sell. For Tarun, it's 90 styles, for example, 90 SKUs, as we call it. So I think for everybody, it's so that there's no absolute answer, but I think you need to your business that can I increase sales by launching new products which are related, which are in the same category, or a category which is kind of category extension, which kind of lends itself beautifully to what I already do. So which is to sell more to the same customer by adding products. The second is on the brand side, where we say that initially people are trying you, right? So they see the brand, they see you on Instagram or on Facebook. 5 people will come in, and then those 5 will tell another 5, and the journey will start from there.
Yeah.
On the brand side, as you kind of go along, can you build higher loyalty? Can you get a word of mouth in place where people are really, referring you to their friends, families, so on and so forth? And also, can you get some PR going, which is, some form of, articles, some form of paid, unpaid, depending on what works for your industry. So some of that going. So I think that's on the brand side. And as the brand builds, automatically a lot of metrics that people will see, on both marketplace and own website starts moving. And lastly, on distribution. So somebody who's online only, can they think of offline? Within offline, can they think of large format stores? Because opening your own stores is very expensive. So people should stay away from that as long as they can. So kind of expand with trade or large format stores or some of those channels. Within online, can we look at more marketplaces? So if you're selling through your website and maybe Amazon and Flipkart, can you look at 5 more? They may not be as big, but they're still kind of cumulatively enough business. On our own website, how can you look at scaling up? Because for a lot of businesses, website, as some panelists have already mentioned, is it's looked at as a brand initiative and not as a sales channel initially. Can we look at it as a sales channel? Can you kind of give targets to the team to say that let's build that as well? So product, brand, distribution, that's what I would say. And these are the 3 large buckets that one can look at. So I think the other panelists can add their call out.
was just the amazing story. One of the key learnings is that you were designing fit by a designer's hat for yourself, and then you started designing it for the customers you were serving. Amazing set of learnings in between these two thoughts. At the end of the day, mathematically, it's a very simple problem to solve, right? If 100 people are what you're serving, serve them, build a great brand, build a great product, build a great loyalty. There are two problems to it. How do I expand 100 to 1,000, 1,000 to 2,000, and 1,000, 10,000, 1 lakh? And how do we keep on serving the existing base, whatever is at that point of time lies, right? So hence, complementary and supplementary products comes into picture to kind of serve the existing base and constantly to kind of broaden the horizon of the existing customer base. You need to find more customers who are like the exact core or the first set of customers, right? So very simply speaking, existing customers ka replica banate jana hai geographically, and on the existing customers we need to make sure that there are odd people. So then probably a saturation problem can be surpassed, because we all face this problem of saturation, be it channel, be it product, be it customer. Mathematically, that's how probably we are trying to solve for it.
Okay. Thank you.
Well, I'll just finish what I wanted to say. So Ojasvita, we've seen and read that this whole flywheel thing which people talk about, it's a much abused word. But what I understand of it is, if there is something which you are able to sell in volume, and that delights a large number of people, and then they talk to a large number of other people, and then they continue to purchase, right? So it took us 2 years. You know, the important point for that is this word of mouth, which Shivani mentioned. How do you get word of mouth at scale? It has to be something which sells easily and has to be very accessible. Now, from your business, I don't know your business, but whatever I heard, it seemed that it's very bespoke, it's customized, so there's a lot of effort going into each order, and uska scale karna mushkil ho jata hai. So for us, although we launched a kajal, an eyeliner, lip crayons, there was one product of ours which we launched 2 years after the brand launch. It was a 499 rupees Smudge Me Not liquid lipstick.
Okay.
You know, I can, if I look at Sugar's journey, I can categorize it to before that product and after that product, because that product suddenly made it so, it just went viral in that whole 20 to 25 age group. And suddenly we saw a lot of new customers coming in. It was purely by fluke. But that's when I realized that the power of selling something which sells itself, right? So maybe at the product level, you need to look at it over and above whatever I'm doing. What is that one thing which can sell even when I'm sleeping and it doesn't need me, right? So that's the only thing I say.
Yeah, this makes sense. Okay.
Great. Thanks,
Thank you so much.
Ojasvita. Thanks for joining in, and thanks to all the panelists for answering the query by Ojasvita. Now we'll move to the audience Q&A. There are a lot of queries. I think the first one is about the mix of different channels for you, and maybe Shivani, I'll pose this to you. That how does the cost per sale differ for you across online, your own website, marketplaces, your own website, and offline? And do you how do you optimize for that? Particularly, like people feel that the cost for through marketplace will be far lower, like cost of acquiring a customer through the website will be far higher. So then should we may take the mix to be higher marketplace contributing? How should we go about this?
Yeah, so in terms of the financials, essentially, one can look at marketplaces and offline, let's say large format stores in the same way, similar metrics broadly. So I'll tell you the broad trade-offs. If you look at 3 buckets, partners, whether it's online or offline, online direct to customer, your website, and last is your own outlets, your own EBOs. So partners, there is a big chunk which is commission, right? So typically everybody pays anywhere between 30 to 40% as commission, and then there is a tax impact, etc. So including all of that, say an average comes to 45%. So on a 1,000 rupee MRP, you are paying 450 rupees straight upfront, including taxes, to your channel partner, and getting 550. Now, assuming your cost of goods sold is at, say 30% of that, so it's 300 gone there with 450. So you're making 250 rupees out of 1,000, which is 25% on every order, assuming you are selling on MRP. If there's a discounting element involved, then you remove the discount. Also, this 250 will broadly become 50 or 80, or depending on how much discount you're giving. So that's there. Now, the good thing about selling through partners is that after that, there is no other cost, right? So even if you're making 80 rupees, but you're selling 100,000 pieces a month, fantastic, right? I mean, it's fine. So even on a, even if you make less money, but you have enough volume because there are so many partners and et cetera, it's an extremely profitable channel to have. broadly. So that's one part. Only if you're offline in large format stores, you have a staff cost, which is one person who you put on every counter. You kind of remove that. You'll
Right.
almost always be profitable. So I think so that's one part of looking at. On the website, there is no commission, right? So you are directly customers, that 1,000 remains 1,000. So you're actually making 700,000 minus 300, assuming there's no discount. So on the 700, now you have to see what is your cost of acquisition. Now it depends on industry to industry. There will be, there will be brands which are okay to pay 600 or 700 and say that, even if we don't make money, it's fine. It's our brand window, etc. And that's why we're doing it. There will be brands who are able to optimize and say that, we're able to kind of our CAC is, or our acquisition cost is 500. I'm making 200. Is my 200 enough to cover fixed costs as well? So I think there are different ways of looking at it. On the website front, I think one has to just kind of justify whether your acquisition cost is more or less than your net that you are making after all direct costs. Between the two websites is, in my experience, the first few years are slightly more challenging because you are acquiring customers and there will be the marketing cost will be higher, especially in the first few years till you start optimizing sales, which kind of happen for repeat sales. So that's how drives that marketplace is extremely profitable. If you're not profitable, one should not even sell there. I don't know why you would even do that if that's not making money for the business. Website can be looked at in two ways. One is as a sales channel and hence kind of for scale. Second is to say that it's also a brand window. It's a must for me. Let people kind of see and hear what I have to say. Let them see my hear my story from me. Sure. And the last is on own outlets. Own outlets, your cost of acquisition for the website becomes your rental there. So again, 1,300 goes on cost, and the balance is your rental and your staff cost. So you have to see that is my rental on an average coming to 400 rupees per piece, 500 rupees per piece. What is that including staff cost, and if that makes sense. So I think one needs to divide it in three broad buckets and then think of what makes more sense in terms of financials. And there's no right answer, Kapil, because for every business, one or the other channel will be more profitable. I mean, it's it's not the same for everybody.
I'm amazed at how fast you just laid down the complete Excel model for anyone to do the calculation.
I actually talk really fast, so maybe in trying to explain that, some people would have been like, what is she saying? But yeah.
No, this is very useful, I think. And I could just see while you were responding, there were 5 related questions that came on that topic. So I'll probably move to a different topic. I think this is very important for a lot of D2C brands. So Tarun, maybe if you could take this, that for someone starting out, how important is advertising or PR? Both are different buckets. How much budget should they keep for advertising, let's say on digital mediums, Facebook and other, Instagram? Should they, again, should it be more dependent on word of mouth? Should they keep a significant budget upfront to do marketing? And should they even invest in, let's say, media or PR?
Okay. So broadly, there are two parts, right? One is if you're a D2C brand or a digital native brand, one of the marketing aspects is performance marketing, where you can get the real data of the buck you're spending, right? And the second is the brand building cost. These are two different heads. For anything performance, it has to be over and above CM2 or your margin profile. It has to be blended in. What Shivani mentioned as a CAC, right? For anything brand building, that has to be a conscious call based on the objectives you want to achieve. On day one, I want to say to the world, this is what it is, and the blitzkrieg is happening. I don't know. It has to be, brand building is not an app download business. You can't spend 1,000 crores and say, "Ki sabka download kara diya." It builds over time, right? So you need to be really conscious about the fact when, how are you building it? And hence the cost flows. PR, absolutely important. We live in a world of PR. I mean, every one of us, right? So PR ante should be very high or very, PR should be played on a very high level right from day one. Paise nahi lagte. Founder needs to spend time, right? Brand building activities, influencer marketing, some integrations, blah, blah. Wherever there is cost to that, you need to assess it based on the objectives you want to achieve. For anything performance, it has to be blended up till CM2. If we are spending money and it is not giving, I mean, just broadly, all the costs aside, right, from your building of product, marketing, discounts, channel margin, all aside, if we are not making 25% on the units we are selling, we're actually not justifying the gross margins we have as a personal care industry or probably apparel. A lot of consumer brands have a 70-75% gross margin one, right? 25% nahi ban raha, then it doesn't make sense to from the marketing standpoint, because else all the costs are kind of fixed, right? So
Sure.
you need to closely assess it.
Sure. No, thanks, Arun. I think this is useful, and I'm really glad that you're sharing those metrics from your experience. I think that will be very helpful in benchmarking for a lot of these companies who are willing to start out. Kaushik, question for you now, and this question came even yesterday in our session. That post-COVID, logistics has been a big challenge, and for you particularly, you being an omni-channel brand, offline presence has also become a big challenge now. Stores keep opening, shutting down. How are you coping with that, or how would a brand cope with this situation post-COVID? And second question, particularly for an omnichannel brand like you, is that do your offline partners consider your D2C presence as a threat, or do they consider it to be a complementary presence? And how do you, in case they consider it as a threat, how do you overcome that fear in their minds?
Thanks, Kapil. I'll answer the second question first because I think it's a very interesting question. So, I'll go back to the time where Shivani said that price parity, maintaining that is very important because see, threat kab hota hai? When you feel that you're going to offer your goods cheaper on your own platforms and you're going to marginalize us, whereas we are giving you precious real estate and malls. For brands who are able to build that discipline across trade channels that, offer will be same, the benefits will be same, then suddenly there is no, like I have actually had, and I don't blame my business partners because they are used to seeing brands who discount aggressively maybe on a particular channel. And, initially there were many examples where we used to get a WhatsApp message that, I saw that you're running this offer somewhere, this is wrong. And, Kapil, I used to be so confident that I used to be like, please tell me which one. I'm going to pull that team to task. And, couple of times it happened that somebody must have seen some other thing. It's not that. Because I was so confident because, as the brand grew, different things got decentralized, like supply, purchase orders, product. Discounting and promotion is something which is still centralized because pricing parity is very important. So then it starts becoming an advantage and not a disadvantage. I'll tell you what, when we launched the lifestyle stores and they were our first modern trade partner, on day one, typically when a new brand launches, they're used to, shiny new counter and your team members over there. And, somebody probably they're waiting for footfalls to come towards the counter. We actually wrote to all our audience in the 5-kilometer, 10-kilometer radius of that store saying that, hey, you've seen us online, come and engage with us. And we drove footfalls to their store. So that was an advantage. That was not a disadvantage for them. So I think as long as we play fair, there is no threat. And to your first question about operations, so I think once we accepted the fact that retail is going to take time to come, then there was no pressure. Because otherwise, every day we were just wondering, Aaj khula, did somebody go there? Did that open there up? And now we have just said that, October is the month where there's going to be Diwali, Dussehra, Durga Puja, Karwa Chauth and everything. And there's going to be so much external stimulus of occasions that we will have to, we were going to see a rebound. That's my bet. But till then, we are taking it easy and saying that, let offline come back. And when it comes there, it's going to be huge because the market is like that. Till then, let's focus on servicing our customers online. And we've luckily, ever since non-essentials was allowed, we've not missed a day wherein we have shipped, all our orders on track.
Okay, great. That's good to know. Just a quick time check. We're still getting a lot of questions. Can we extend this by another 10 minutes or so? If that's okay with all of you?
I'm okay.
Yeah.
Great. So another question, Shivani, to you, I think many of the audience is asking is, there's a lot of talk about customer data. I also mentioned that at the start of the session. How do you personally use this data and what kind of decisions do you make from that data on a day-to-day basis? And I think it's an important question. Would be great if Tarun and Kaushik can also add to that. Shivani, we'll start with you first.
Yes, I'll just highlight, I think, two things and then Tarun and Kaushik can take it. So one is for us on customer data is a lot of changes are done on the product based on the data. So like I was mentioning, who are my customers, where are they buying from, which demographics, and what are they buying? Once I know what are they buying and who is buying what, essentially, we're able to figure out that what attributes work. So we are able to say that black sleeveless blouse, with X, length, etc., is going to sell so much in this region. And hence we're able to predict demand in advance, which really helps in our whole buying process and the supply chain. So I think that's the key thing, and especially for a fashion brand, because we have to make so many styles in a season. It's very important to have that data in place to be able to predict what's going to sell. So that's on the first part, which is, on better inventory management, better buying, etc., using the data that we have. Second is on the service part. So again, once we have the data of, where are people buying from, which pin codes are our highest pin codes, etc., how do we service them better? One is that, better logistics. And from an offline point of view, can we open stores there? Can we ask our partners that can we go to these? So if within Chennai, X pin codes are doing better, can we map it and say that it makes sense for me to open a store, say in T Nagar and Chennai, because that's doing better? Or within Delhi, should we go to, say, a Rajouri Garden and open a store because I have a lot of customers from West Delhi? So I think a lot of that thought from data comes in to say that, can I integrate online and offline beautifully, that because I already know where my customers are and where are they buying from, can we do more of that and use that well? So these are the top, two things, and there are many, many more, but I'll leave Tarun and Kaushik to kind of add on to it. Yeah.
Sure. Before you do that, Tarun, Kaushik, there is also a related question is, how do you drive personalization in the customer journey based on the data that you get? If you can also touch upon that, I think that will be useful.
Sure. So I think large part of it is what Shivani has covered. At a basic level, I mean, if you write all the business verticals and the problem statements which you're facing, and write all the questions, what, when, where, how, everything, and just concatenate everything. Whatever you get as a business problem, it has to be solved by data. And data is not just about the consumer purchase data in digital era, right? You get the impressions, you get the engagement, you get everything out of it, right?
Right.
So largest team in MCaffeine is data team, right? And our brand marketing, a data team works under the brand marketing team. So our brand building is also largely data driven. All the answers should be all the questions should be answered by data, not by Tarun's hunch or Vikas's hunch or Mohit's or Saurabh's or Vaishali's hunch. At the end of the day, if you ask the right question to your data will speak the right answer. Calcutta mein maal ye bik raha hai aur wo Punjab mein nahi bik raha hai, so there has to be a reason which the data will also tell you, because of the way the creatives are made, because of the way targeting is done, etc. So at the end of the day, that D2C, whether volumes or voice, it all boils down to that data. And as founders, I think we have consciously taken a call where we have less creative engineers / artists and more data engineers, because we always believe at the end of the day, this is the new way of building a brand. It cannot happen wherein Tarun smelled a certain fragrance and he liked it and hence we launch it. It is not about how it has been done over probably past 100 years. It has to have an analytical model wherein we define that this fragrance works for this type of audience and this fragrance doesn't work for. How we want to choose for market is something which we take decision out of that insight. But at the end of the day, this is the new way of building a brand, and data is at the core of everything, right from product development to the final consumer journey. With respect to personalization, there are enough tools available there. They help you design the journeys in the most intelligent way possible, so that I can reach out to Kaushik with a very specific and personalized request or / association with him, and same with Shivani, based on both their interest, both their journeys. And again, everything comes from data. Enough tools like WebEngage and others which can do that for us.
Sure.
I'll just add a bit about how we look at data. I think we see there are 3 parts to it. One is deciding what you want to measure. Secondly, making information out of data. Third is actually predicting. So I think we do the first 2 things really well. The third part, which comes of predicting behavior, I think we are still yet to achieve excellence over there. But I agree with what Shivani and Tarun said. I think measuring what sells is one thing, but engagement opens up, especially in category like ours. See, ours is as now has been proven, non-essential. It's very, temptation category. So you get it's a temptation purchase. It's a desire, not a need. So tracking things like how many times has a particular page been viewed by a customer. If a customer viewed a page like 11, 12 times in the last 3 days and has not purchased, I'm missing a sale if I don't target the person specifically with something that converts. So I think that's something we measure. Predictability, my only caveat here is that when we use tools of the market, I mean, Tarun, you're correct. There are a lot of tools. We have taken demos of quite a few. The only thing is they operate on AI/ML, which assimilates data across a lot of businesses and give recommendations. We have to have the check key, does it fit your brand's narrative or not? Otherwise, they will say that it's customer ko buy one get one, and if you've never done buy one get one in your life, And if you don't stop it there, then suddenly market may, yes, your trade partners will call and say, why are you giving this offer? I mean, and trouble starts. You can't say it was automated. Then,
True. So this is useful.
Correct.
I'll just pose two more questions and then maybe we can wrap it up. One is that there's a lot of I think given that a lot of audience in India is now mobile first. How does a D2C brand plan its app strategy? Somebody who's been selling, let's say, on the website and has not built an app, should they be planning that transition? How much time do they should they give it to scale up? So if maybe Kaushik, you can answer that for Sugar. How did you go about making that decision?
so we delayed the whole app decision for a long while because I personally wasn't convinced. Because what are the apps I use? If you look at an Uber or Ola, I mean, when I used to use them, you can't use it for the one-time purchase on your mobile. I mean, you have to visit at least 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 times. Now, if the person is not purchasing, then why will they visit your app, right? I think till the time we didn't have an answer to our question, we delayed making the app, but we did launch our app late of last year. And this year, it's actually scaled pretty fast. It's like we were January, February, we were doing about 10% of our sales on the app, and last month it had crossed the 50% mark. So, but it makes me nervous as well because I keep telling the team that okay, somebody who's purchased. Now, how are you engaging the person with some content, with some, do it yourself or something? Because if it's once they uninstall, it's very tough to get them started. So we are approaching it cautiously. And I think for those starting up, you can defer the decision right now.
Okay.
I mean, somebody a while back in the question said that, I have a plan, but how do I get started? Simple. Go to Amazon, scroll down, and become a seller. Click on that link. It is really, really simple. Trust me. Just get started, right? And things will happen. I mean, it takes time to learn, right? But the more you do, you make mistakes and will learn. That's the only thing I will say. That's what we do.
Sure. So my final question to you, Tarun, I think you have done an amazing job of using your presence on Amazon to build your own D2C brand. And there's a question that, are there any strategies to move the already acquired customer from shopping my products at Amazon to my own website? How do they do that?
I mean, the basic infrastructure problem with which we have faced is that you don't get a unique identifier for all your customers. So if someone is purchasing on Amazon, they're masked. And to grow Amazon, there are certain things which you need to do, and hence you don't get the data in entirety, which is a limitation. But at the end of the day, there are volumes to kind of make sure you're balanced. So I don't know, we haven't done it. We haven't done it ever that we have asked people who are purchasing on Amazon that, hey, why don't you purchase on website? Fundamentally, because one, it is an infrastructure problem. Second, if at all that's not a problem, we will think about why we would do that. Because if somebody's purchasing on Amazon, there are largely 4 areas he's kind of hooked on to Amazon because of assortment. He's just not buying our body scrub, right? That's not the only thing he or she is buying. I mean, there are tons of different things. Assortment is one, delivery is second. Third is the ease of ordering, credit card saved, address saved, etc., etc. And then there might be some pricing benefit he or she would be getting across products he or she is purchasing. So would we be able to do all these 4 things? No, that's a different arena of war we are entering. Hence, if people are hooked to a certain channel of commerce, let them be hooked to. Our job as a brand is to serve the right customers with the right product, with the right narrative. If that's happening and there's a healthy business scenario which is being built, we are okay with it. So we never actually proactively tried it, although there is an infrastructure problem.
Sure. Great. Thanks. With that, we've already exceeded by 15 minutes. Thanks again so much, Shivani, Tarun, Kaushik, for gracing up with your presence here, and hoping our audience got a lot of insights from the discussion today.
I think it was a great session, Kapil. I missed mentioning one of the points when you raised the question of fundraising. The best fundraise which can happen is from a customer. सही price देता है, exit rights नहीं मांगता, और co-investors भी लेके आता है. So that's the best investor we can ask for.
That's frame कर दो इसको. This.
Fantastic ending, Tarun. Yeah.
Great. Thanks so much, Tarun, for that. Thanks again, Shivani and Kaushik.
Thank you. Thank you for having us. Yeah.
Yes,
Thank you.
And thank you to everybody who joined, all the audience. Thanks for coming.
Thank you.
Thanks. Bye. Take care.